France. A priest has been killed during an attack on a church.
In France, where a priest has been killed during an attack on a church.
Two Islamic extremists attacked a church in northern France on Tuesday, killing a priest and injuring two other people.
Two men armed with knives took 5 people hostage in Normandy before they were killed by police.
Terribly saddened by the assassination by 2 terrorists claiming to be from Daesh.
Europol puts the number of foreign fighters at 5,000. Of these, around 1/3 have returned to the EU. Many of them don't have any intentions to commit attacks. Nevertheless, hundreds of potential terrorists remain, posing a threat to security in Europe.
If we look at the situation where Islamic State are actually attacking, a lot of it seems to be going in the direction of France. Why in particular have they seem to become the #1 enemy?
Well, I think some of it is because of the brutal war in Algeria that ended decades ago, but a lot of people haven't forgotten France's role in that. And the second, another factor is the fact that it isn't just France, but also Britain and Brussels and other countries in Europe began importing cheap labor from the Middle East decades ago. And they didn't take a lot of attention to the fact that once these people were here, they weren't going to go back home, nor did they provide them with paths to citizenship or deal with their social and economic needs as well as they might. So you've got ghettos, if you will, in almost every Western European country.
Returning now to our top story, the knife attack in Japan. I'm joined by TRT World's Sandra Gatman, who was born and raised in Japan. Now, Sandra, thank you for coming on. So this is a very unusual crime for Japan, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's the largest mass killing in Japan, actually, since its post-war history. More people died in this single killing spree than the 12 lives were claimed in the infamous sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway back in 1995. But this is particularly horrifying. Many people, of course, know Japan as one of the safest countries in the world, due, of course, to its strict gun laws. Police officers on the streets aren't even allowed to carry arms. But of course, all of that means that knives are used, not only by criminals, but in domestic incidents as well. And there have been isolated stabbings in homes across Japan on the streets every year. But that is, of course, kept in confinement. There isn't a history of terrorism in Japan, and many people are horrified that this incident involves victims with disabilities. So people are truly shocked.
Absolutely. And culturally, Japan has a great deal of respect for the disabled and the elderly, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think Japan is considered as having the best care system in the world, both for the elderly and for disabled people. And the fact that a former employee was able to breach security, enter these homes, tie up staff, and carry out 19 murders, injuring several dozens of others.
A Japanese man accused of breaking into a facility for the disabled in a small town near Tokyo before stabbing and killing 19 patients was taken from a regional jail to see prosecutors on Wednesday. According to footage on public broadcaster NHK, Satoshi Uematsu was sent to the Yokohama District Public Prosecutor's Office in Kanagawa Prefecture. Uematsu is 26 years old and is a former employee of the facility. Reuters reports dozens of other residents were wounded in Tuesday's early morning attack at the facility for the disabled in Sagamihara. Uematsu gave himself up to police after Japan's worst mass killing in decades. In letters he wrote in February, he said that he could obliterate 470 disabled people.
According to a human rights group, witnesses say some captured military officers from Turkey's failed coup are being raped by police. Hundreds of detained soldiers have been beaten, and some are withheld food, water, and access to lawyers for days. Amnesty International reported this week detainees awaiting trial have been beaten and tortured in official and unofficial holding centers in Istanbul and Ankara, following the July 15th coup attempt by parts of Turkey's military. Interviews with detainees' lawyers, doctors, and a person who was on duty at one of the centers in Ankara are cited by
on all lawyers of Turkish society is gaining speed. It's not only military, academics or journalists being targeted, but also religious and other minorities. The media reports that hardline Islamic rhetoric that gains momentum in Turkey following the coup attempt is putting huge pressure on more secular parts of society. As RT's Lizzie Phelan reports, fears of a civil war are mounting on the horizon.
Relief in Turkey has been replaced by dread. With the coup attempt seemingly over, tens of thousands have already fallen victim to the ruling AKP's response, which has been described as the biggest witch hunt in the history of the Turkish Republic. Turkey's minorities are also afraid about what the coming days will hold. This has become a common sight in the streets. Government supporters making the gesture of the Grey Wolves, a notorious ultra-nationalist organisation with a vision of a pan-Turkic empire.
The first blast took place near the entrance of an African Union base near the city's main airport, and the second happened at a checkpoint manned by government forces. Police say 2 suicide bombers were behind the attacks. Militant group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for the incidents.
There were 2 blasts. One was foiled and the other one occurred near the airport. A total of 13 people died and 5 others are injured. No more casualties caused by today's attack.
Intense fighting between rival troops in South Sudan has forced more than 37,000 people to flee to neighboring Uganda in the last 3 weeks. Reports say the majority of the arrivals are women and children, as men are forcibly recruited by armed groups. Witnesses say facilities on the Ugandan side are overwhelmed with the sheer size of the influx. The locals in South Sudan say clashes between forces loyal to President Salva Kiir and replaced Vice President Riek Machar have subsided since early July. However, the security situation remains volatile. Several cases of looting by armed militias, burning down of homes, and murders of civilians have so far been reported by South Sudanese people.
Forces have demolished nearly a dozen Palestinian homes in the occupied West Bank. The homes were razed to the ground overnight in the town of Galandia, north of Jerusalem Al-Quds. Dozens of Palestinians were injured in clashes with Israeli forces as they tried to stop them from demolishing the houses. The Israeli regime usually destroys Palestinian structures under the pretext that they are built illegally, but aid groups say obtaining necessary permits is nearly impossible. An Israeli rights group says Tel Aviv has demolished more Palestinian homes in the West Bank this year compared to nearly every other year in the past decade. According to Bet Salam Group, Israel razed 168 homes in the occupied territories from January to the end of June this year. The demolition in 2016 left 740 people homeless.
Heavy clashes continue in eastern Ukraine between pro-Russian militias and government forces. Several soldiers have been killed in the latest round of fighting.
In the past 24 hours, 3 Ukrainian soldiers were killed and 3 more were wounded as a result of clashes. We express our condolences to the families of fallen soldiers.
Despite the ceasefire agreement aimed at halting the war in eastern Ukraine, fighting has surged in recent days.
I'm standing here in front of a Democrat all-gender restroom. Now, it was just last week we heard billionaire Peter Thiel speak at the Republican convention. He said when he was a kid, the great debate was over how we were going to defeat the Soviet Union, and we won. He said now the great debate is who's going to use which bathrooms, and he said it is simply a distraction. Yeah, it's a distraction, and it's emblematic, I think, of the problems that we see here at the Democrat Party.
Did you talk about Vice President?